Well, greetings, fans. It's your friendly neighborhood PhD, Dr. Judd Burton, back with another Beyond Report. And here with me today is a man who needs a little introduction, Dr. Mike Heiser, biblical scholar extraordinaire. How are you, Mike?
Yeah, pretty good. Pretty good.
Well, we've been doing Fringe Pop this week.
Yes, we have.
Yeah. What do you think?
It's pretty fringy.
Yes. That's one way to say it, right? So we
It's
talked
coming
about
up.
we've talked about weird things like zombies and witches and
Satyrs.
satyrs
Yeah.
and everything in between.
Yeah. Then I did. We filmed a couple. My sessions today. What did I do? It's kind of a challenge to remember what I did on any given day. We did a couple Ark of the Covenant. The Zuio Maru Plesiosaur. I know I'm butchering that.
That's
Japanese word.
that's the one they found there in New Zealand.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the one of three off New Zealand. What else did we do? Oh, we did a couple biblical ones. You know, the myth of the third of the angels' rebellion. We did that. But that's just because we want snarky things on the YouTube channel.
Sure.
Just in the comments.
Yes.
We did one on false prophets. A couple on one on America. Did French and English explorers encounter giants in southeast U.S.
Mhm.
And then another one on Mesoamerican giants. That one was basically the content of Codex Rios, which there's a famous one, maybe not a famous, but probably a well-trafficked picture from that codex
Mhm.
that depicts a giant. But it's actually based upon a story in a different codex
Mhm.
that was just translated into English, so it's kind of a convoluted path. But yeah, those are the sessions we did.
Did you consult the Tedlock translations?
It was Beer Horst for that one codex.
Okay.
I can't remember the name of the codex. I'll butcher it. It was Chopa something. I have to go look at the notes, but it wasn't Rios. It was a different one. It was
Okay.
it was the Stinking Corpse Tale, and it was the Beer Horst translation.
But these, of course, are the ones that are derived from the handful of the codices that were
There's
like the four.
they're all like 15th, 16th century texts that were put together in part using indigenous people,
Mhm.
basically relating, the history of these things. So it really points to a twofold problem. On the one hand, the textual data that you have is 15th, 16th century. The flip side of that is, a well-related problem is the people they were using to interview. Okay, that we have no way of knowing that how versed those people actually were in their own prehistory.
Mhm.
I mean, it could have just been whoever the survivor was, whoever was willing to do this. So I'm sure you got some good things. I'm sure you got some others that maybe only knew half of the story or something like that. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag. But the real problem is the stories they do relate. So the ones that we do have are not modern accounts. I mean, there's one exception here with Cortez, but most of it is like, the first sun, which would have been the first age in Aztec history or mythology.
Mhm.
So this is like remote antiquity, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
So it's a little bit misleading to come across these sites on the internet and think like, wow, this story that this native is telling this European. Some of these sites create the impression like these are eyewitnesses, like it's something right at that time.
Mhm.
That's not actually the case. So, but it's interesting nonetheless. There's one of them that in part reads. It has some pretty clear parallels to Genesis 6. But the problem with that one is the giants in that story. This is the Kinometzen or the Kinometzen.
Mhm.
And it's a Nahuatl, which is the Aztec
Aztec
language
language.
term for bird leg.
Mhm. Okay.
So the idea was that their legs were so thin and frail when you knocked one over, they couldn't get up. I mean, that very obviously doesn't sound like a Nephilim or
Right.
Himmarim or something like that. So that's a significant disconnection,
Mhm.
but there's still a flood context.
Mhm.
So it's hard to know why you get some details and then other details because they're so different. They're so diametrically
And
opposed.
then part of the challenge with regard to the flood stuff is to what degree have they been exposed to
Oh, to
the
Europeans.
Franciscans or Jesuits?
No.
Yeah.
So how much of that content is filtered or interpreted by the person recording the material?
Sure.
Then that you do get that problem with Cortez, like the white god, mythology.
Mhm.
That's really part of that whole thing going on. In the Cortez example, they don't have a contemporary situation where Cortez's men see a giant, rather bones are brought. and that I related to an article. There's actually a really detailed article on mammoth remains in Mexico, and it's hundreds of places. And so whoever did that, correlated some of these stories with these spots, where prehistoric remains were discovered.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably what's going on there with Cortez. It would be different if it was like hey, we saw this guy come into camp and he was really huge. It's not like that. It's the natives are telling them these stories. And then, so the Spaniards believe it. They truck in, like some molars, whatever it was that they brought in.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like fresh meat. It was, these were bones, or fossilized remains. So, it's really inconclusive, as to what's going on there. But again, this is what we do in Fringe Pop. It's stuff that people should know about, give it some context.
Well, and negative evidence is still evidence. It's still important to the intellectual chase. But it also illustrates why I think that the archaeological component of these questions are the most difficult.
Yeah.
Because the physical evidence is, I'm not ready to say that it's not there, but it's in such small amount, and there's so many hoaxes.
Oh, I know.
And as you pointed out, you have the issue of paleontological.
Yeah, the Proboscidean problem is actually a real problem. For your listeners, Proboscideans would be mammoths, anything with a trunk, kind of thing. So when you get a skull, it leaves that hole in the middle because the tusks are missing. Yeah, you get that. That happens all the time. There's actually a pretty decent number of journal articles like this one that focused on Mexico that I referenced this time that have tackled that problem. It's really odd. On the one hand, we've done 3 episodes now on New World giant stuff. And the best one, the one that has the real evidence, was the one we did on North America, which is the Bureau of
Ethnology,
the Smithsonian report from 1894. Where I think it was 5 or 6 skeletons that were recovered from mounds that were over 7 feet tall. So, I mean, this is demonstrably real stuff. But the irony is that typically the North American giant mythology denies indigenous creation of the mounds. But that's actually where you find the best evidence.
Right.
And it's just this weird sort of inverted, like, do the math, like why would you deny this one thing over here and here you have the evidence for this over here? It's just really odd.
Why are these things relevant that you cover on Fringe Pop? Why do Christians need to be thinking about the weird things, about the paranormal
weird stuff? Yeah. I think a channel like Fringe Pop and just the subject, just the inquiry in general, I think is not only useful for apologetics, but in our day and age is actually becoming almost necessary, because there are an increasing number of people who are either jaded or who have rejected what we would call a traditional Judeo-Christian worldview. So there are lots of people who've rejected that, but there are also a lot of people who have also rejected a worldview that is nothing more than scientific materialism. That's just unsatisfactory on a number of levels. And so they want mystery, they want transcendence, they want something that, again, is bigger than themselves. Again, and there's a suspicion, it's part of the postmodern mind, there's a suspicion of authority on either side of this. And so this kind of content provides like a middle way, a middle worldview. And so this is why, Ancient Aliens is so popular. It preserves the transcendent, but it rejects these 2 other things. And so that has, it preserves kind of the way we're hardwired. We're hardwired to believe that there's something bigger than ourselves, the whole religious impulse. That's really a lot of hardwiring. I mean, this from anthropology. So this sort of strokes that need or fills that void for a lot of people. So ghosts, aliens, mysteries of the past that the scientific community either is completely dismissive of or doesn't really give attention, which creates the impression that they're avoiding it. So any number of these sorts of things that show up on History Channel or just the internet in general, so many people watch that, and that it doesn't have to, but for many it leads to a reinforcing of the rejection of, again, the traditional Judeo-Christian worldview. And really, I mean, you might think, well, that's okay. It's good that they reject the other side, the scientific materialism. Yeah, I agree. I'm not a materialist, but I also think that there's something to the scientific method.
Certainly.
It's important because it's a process of thinking and evaluating evidence. yes, we don't want to be materialists here. We're not, but clear thinking is actually a good thing. So there are people who just reject that as well because it doesn't lead to this conclusion, this thing they want to believe that's kind of at the center. So when you get enough people like that, and it's hard to have conversations about getting them to consider, in our case, a biblical worldview. They either don't think they need it, or they think they've trumped it by virtue of this other knowledge, this special secret knowledge that they got from Giorgio, ancient aliens.
Never heard of it.
It's just this. I think it's really important, again, to be able to at least engage and at least affirm that somebody's interest in that is a good thing. But again, what we try to do with Fringe Pop is, okay, here's this thing. It's interesting. It's worth spending time to do an episode on. But maybe you need to think a little bit better about primary sources and think a little more logically. And you reach this conclusion, but did you factor this question in your conclusion? I mean, this is what we're trying to do, just to help people think a little bit better.
Sure.
And value primary sources, because the Bible is one of those primary sources.
So, and in an age when people can post their favorite website or YouTube video as rationale for their argument.
Right, right. I posted it, so there's my argument.
Right, exactly. I'm just sharing an anecdote here. I got into a debate on Facebook with someone about Lupercalia.
I hope I never am able to say that.
Well, I try to avoid them as much as I possibly can. But it was about the Lupercalia, and which was happened in February on the Roman calendar, and is generally associated with the god Pan, who we talked about this week in the context of our Satyrs episode. But the argument that they were trying to make was, look, this is the same thing as Valentine's Day, and there were which Saint Valentine do we choose from? And,
if two things look alike, they must
be the same. And so I asked simply, give me a primary source to support your argument. And there was just a parade of YouTube videos. The idea is just completely lost, at some point. And that may not be their fault entirely. It may be
it probably isn't. But I mean,
but that's the value of programs like Fringe Pop is to reassert the value. Primary sources.
We try to create a web page. We're a little bit behind on web pages, but we try to create a web page for each episode. Everyone that I do, before I get here, I've already written the web page. But we're a little bit behind on getting those things edited and posted. But on each of those, I try to list, again, peer-reviewed source material, not just books that you could find on Amazon, but journal articles and things like this. And a lot of people don't even know those things exist. And the shocking part is, you can have people graduate from college and never have been asked to read a journal article. Like they have no idea what one is. Could I buy that in the bookstore? Was that no? It's a journal article. I mean, so there are a lot of people who even who get through college that have no idea that there's a massive, enormous body of scholarly research that's published that doesn't live on the internet and is not a book. And honestly, my own personal study, journals are the first thing I use because if it's a good journal article, it's basic. I mean, I'm fundamentally lazy, I guess. I mean, they do the work for you.
The heavy lifting for you.
It's like a mini dissertation. They're wonderful because what's published in journals is scholars writing for scholars. They write for the people in the guild, and that presses them to do really careful research because it gets anonymously reviewed by field experts before it's published. I mean, this is why this stuff is important. And so, I can sit, it's easy for me to sit there and watch the History Channel and hear yet again about how scholars are flummoxed by, this, they're not. No, actually, they're not. There's like 20 journal articles I could give you in an hour on this. But the average person watching this has no idea that stuff even exists. It's not that they don't know how to get to it. They literally don't know it exists. And so that's another thing we're trying to do. I hate to call it awareness raising, but fundamentally that's what it is.
It is, yeah. And it doesn't have anything to do necessarily with people having degrees, because a lot of this stuff is it's public access, it's databases.
If it's not, I mean, like journals, it's just, I know why they do it. Because I worked for 15 years at Logos, and we have conversations with people who publish, the outfits that publish journals all the time. So I know why they do it. Some of the reasons are intelligent. In other words, it's economic, but a lot of their other reasons are just snobbery. But this is academia. This is the way it is. And they don't post things on the internet. You cannot just get access to them. So if you have, what I advise people to do is look, if you went to college or you went to seminary or something like that, you should have probably, I would think, still an institutional email address.
Mm-hmm.
And you should be able to use that to get library privileges, to at least search for these articles.
Oh, sure.
And if you get library privileges, then you may have to pay $20 a year. Like when we lived in the Northwest, I wasn't near an institution that I attended, but all I had to do was pay $25 a year to use the Trinity Western Library, a research library. And what that meant was I could log in, search their journal databases, and all the journal articles are free.
Sure.
In PDF.
Yeah. But I don't know.
Anybody can do that.
Yeah, I don't know. If you go into college, if you're an alumnus of a school, I don't know any place that wouldn't give you a library card.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what it is. It's the digital equivalent for a library card. And, it's a minimal cost, but to be able to get to the journal databases is just, it's really indispensable.
It's valuable.
For anybody who wants to do serious research.
Agreed. Well, how do folks access Fringe Pop?
Fringe Pop, you can just go to YouTube and search for it. Just Fringe Pop 321, it'll come up. We're not competing with any other Fringe Pops, at least right now. So we're about 100 episodes in. So that's the easy way to find the YouTube channel. If you're using Google, you'd find it as well if you put in the same search terms. If you're on my website, it's going to be in one of the pull-down menus, to the website.
Why don't you throw out your website?
My website is drmsh.com. So DR as in doctor and then my initials.com.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Greetings, friends. Welcome back. It's your friendly neighborhood PhD, Dr. Judd Burton. I'm here once again with Dr. Mike Heiser, biblical scholar and author. And he has a new book out on demons called Demons. Interestingly.
But the subtitle is important. The subtitle is important and intentional. So we call it demons so that people will actually be attracted to it. It's easier to find in the search engine. But the subtitle is what the Bible really says about the powers of darkness. So the subtle message there is that not all demons are the powers of darkness. Those two things are not equatable completely. So demons are a subset. So even the subtitle, I'm trying to get people to look at that and think a thought.
Well, I mean, it's not for Christians. It's not that topic has ever been
exhausted.
Well, I was going to say
touched
that it's not necessary. That it shouldn't be a peripheral subject, but sometimes it is a peripheral subject. It's one of those things that we like to sweep under the church rug. Sometimes, unfortunately, I remember last year at the Sons of God conference, Dr. Greg Reed said that we've been so busy as a church fighting at the vanguard that the devil has silently slipped in behind and infiltrated in some ways. And so we're going to get into a little bit of that this evening. Would you say that that's a pretty sound assessment of?
Yeah, I think that there's. I would say, generally, yes. I think that there are surreptitious, maybe that's the wrong word, but means by which that happens that we aren't looking for or don't detect.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be cultural. It can be any number of things. Frankly, I think it's a little more overt, nowadays that certain ideas tend to get thrown out there that are more of a direct assault rather than, an end around, kind of thing like, just the whole gender neutrality, sorts of discussions and whatnot. There are other things that are a little bit more shady. Then there are some things that are just right in your face. All right. I think it's a little bit of both.
Well, there's, anybody that's a serious student of the Bible can discern that there's a hierarchy, of these forces. Can you synopsize that hierarchy?
Yeah. I mean, what we know biblically about the powers of darkness ultimately derives from the Old Testament. So we'll start there. And I like to introduce the subject this way. If you ask the average Christian, in church, hey, why is the world such a mess? Why do we have evil, both on the human level and the supernatural? We're where does all this come from? This just, where do we get this mess? And if you ask that question to the average Christian, the answer you get is, well, that's the fall. You're dunderhead. Don't you read your Bible, Mike? Well, yeah, I do. And that's a nice answer, but that's quite incomplete. So if you ask the average question, again, the same question.
He gets average answer.
Yeah. But if you asked it to a Second Temple Jew, they would say, well, there's actually three reasons why the world is a mess. this chaotic anti-Eden thing, okay? And you have the fall, Genesis 3. You've got what happened in Genesis 6. You've got what happened at Babel. Now, the first one, most Christians are acquainted with, obviously. The second one, we have been taught systematically to not see anything there, nothing supernatural. It's, the Sethite view has become the dominant view and whatnot, even though, Peter certainly doesn't take it that way, and lots of other people didn't take it that way. That's what it is. So that one gets dismissed. And then the third one, we never even see. We don't even get to the point where we can dismiss it because we never even see it. And that's because if we read the Bible story in Genesis, there are no cosmic bad guys there. And so if it's familiar to you, you think, Mike, you're a crazy man. Like, I don't see the demons there or whatever. Well, that's because you're not reading Deuteronomy 32:8. And if your English translation doesn't follow the Dead Sea Scrolls, you'll never see it there either. This is when the Most High divided up the nations, he divided them up according to the number of the sons of God. But Israel is Yahweh's portion. Jacob is his blood and inheritance. So the nations are assigned to lesser, members of the heavenly host, these sons of God. ESV has that, NLT has that, and RSV. I mean, some English translations have incorporated the Dead Sea Scroll material right. The verse. It's really important, but other ones haven't. And so I grew up. I was weaned on the King James. That was my first Bible I read for many years, and that doesn't happen. So I had never seen it. I was a doctoral student before I ever saw that, which is kind of incredible. When you get to grad school, they don't let you read English translations anyway. They make you read texts. So, I was in the same boat as everybody else. So we're not conscious of the fact that now we've got a third rebellion. Okay, we know that these sons of God, they don't follow, their charge. God wants them to be essentially placeholders. Hey, we're going to get back to the nations at some point because I'm divorcing them now. I've had it up to here with humanity. So, we're divorcing the nations, and I'm going to go over and start over again with this guy, Abraham, and his wife. And she's perfect because she can't have kids. This is awesome. Because now I'm going to supernaturally raise up a new humanity that's going to parallel, what we tried to do back in Eden. We're going to use this one now to kickstart the other one. But in the meantime, all the nations, they're not going to have a relationship with me. You guys handle them. And we know that God still is interested in them because when he makes a covenant with Abraham, he says, well, it's going to be through you guys that I'm going to loop the nations back into this. I'm not just casting them off and forgetting about them permanently. And when they're judged in Psalm 82, they're judged because they sow chaos among their populations, among the nations, and God doesn't want that. So it's not that he hates the nations, it's just that they're, Jacob have I loved, and Esau, I hate you, but really set aside, for now. But all that is where the New Testament gets its theology. Before you even get to the New Testament of Daniel, here's a basic question, pro tip, pro Bible studies.
Are you people paying attention?
When you're reading passages like Daniel 10, and Daniel starts talking about the Prince of Persia, the Prince of Greece, pro tip, ask yourself the question, where does Daniel get that idea? I mean, if you're reading your Old Testament from Genesis and you hit Daniel, you haven't seen that. Where does he get that idea? Is Daniel sitting there thinking, I got to finish chapter 10, I don't know what to do, I'll just make something up.
I'll take all this Babylonian stuff and
hand this in now. No, he's getting it from somewhere. He's getting it from Deuteronomy 32. And this is where Paul picks up his vocabulary through the Septuagint. So what you really have is you've got Satan, you've got the sons of God who are imprisoned in all the traditions. Okay? Greco-Roman, Hebrew, Second Temple Judaism, New Testament. These are the angels that sin that are kept in chains of gloomy darkness. Their offspring were considered to be the origin point for demons. And when you killed a lot of the Nephilim or the giant clans, this is their disembodied spirit is now a demon. And by the way, that idea is like the John 3:16 of Second Temple Judaism. Every text agrees. There are no outliers. Okay, so this is a point they all agree on, and they're called unclean spirits. And guess where you find them? You find them in the New Testament, in the Gospel.
That's the most common word.
It's the most common term. There's actually a whole dissertation on this that's now published as a book that I quote in the Demons book by Clint Wallen, on the concept of where do we get this impure spirit, the unclean spirit language. And the logic of it is Levitical. Most of your prohibitions in Leviticus are based on forbidden mixture, that sort of thing. So that's why they're unclean spirits. It's why the Dead Sea Scrolls call them bastard spirits. That's what they are. So you got those, and then you got the principalities and powers, which is what Paul is talking about when he uses terms like, our principalities, powers, rulers, thrones, all that stuff. He's talking about the Deuteronomy 32 stuff at Babel. And so all of this is the world, this is the cast of characters, not complete, but mostly in the powers of darkness. And in the Old Testament, they're not hierarchicalized. In the Second Temple period is when you begin to start seeing that, because all they're doing in the Second Temple period is they're looking back at the Old Testament, which they view as inspired in sacred scripture. And they're seeing all these data points, and they're asking questions like, do the three groups of bad guys, do they know each other? Like, what's the relationship with one another? How does this work? And the thought trajectories are simple. The first one, what's the real fallout of the fall? It's death. Okay? Everything dies. There is no more Eden. Everything is anti-Eden. And so when you have the Genesis 6 problem come along, and the real issue there is not the Nephilim, it's the proliferation of depravity because of what the Watchers teach, the humans.
Sure.
That just makes more concrete the death problem because it gets people, it directs them away from the true God and helps them to destroy themselves more efficiently and more thoroughly. And so, the first rebel, he sort of gets prime of place because like he gave us this whole system. He is the God of this world because everything dies now. And so what the second group does contributes to what the first one does. You could have the second one, you can have the first one without the second one. You can't have the second without the first, and that kind of thing. So they're looking at this and the fragmentation of humanity again, steering people away to idolatry. That assists with death too, because without a relationship with true God, this is where you end up. And so the original rebel sort of gets prominence because what he does has an exhaustive impact on everything else. It is the complete reversal of what God wanted. So he gets street cred for that. He owns the world, so to speak. So when you have these lesser or these other rebels, doing their thing, they're still part of this world, and that world is owned by the Satan figure. Okay, and only in a conceptual sense, because again, everything dies. No matter what happens, it is going to land at his doorstep. So the middle group, the demons, where do they live? They live in the realm of the dead because they're disembodied spirits. The other ones, okay, they have geographical dominion, but guess what? Their subjects, humans, when they die, guess who owns them? It's the first one. And when they sow chaos among their nations, they're actually serving his ends. So again, Second Temple writers are looking at these things and they're asking these kinds of questions, and they're just sort of noodling the data. And this is why this hierarchy emerges, where Satan is the god of this world. The demons are, they occupy his living space, and therefore they're under his roof, and so in some sense they're his servants. He does own all the nations. It's a legitimate offer when he's with Jesus, and he says, "Well, whatever you're here for, okay, I'll give you all the nations of the world, and you ought to be happy."
That's a good point because it ties directly
down.
Yeah,
it ties it right back to the whole, the whole death, thing. That ultimately, I do have command over all these nations. That you want to turn these nations into a new Eden. Well, newsflash, Jesus, they're all going to die. Okay, so I own their destiny. I'm the only one that can turn it back over to you. So here we go. You want the nations or not? You can have them if you just fall down and worship. It's an insidious sort of thing that plays off a particular trajectory of biblical theology. Obviously, Jesus is smarter than this. He knows things that the other guy doesn't. So we don't go down that path. But there's a certain logic to it that ties these things together. And again, Second Temple writers are looking at this. New Testament writers are reading that material. Again, if your audience is not sitting down, sit down. I'm going to say something profound.
Sit down.
New Testament writers read books. Really, they read books like Enoch, and some of the Dead Sea Scroll stuff. They were literate. They read this stuff, and under the providence of God, that stuff helped. It helped them express an idea that they're in the middle of a letter. And, oh yeah, okay, I'll say it this way, because this thing is floating around in their head that they read, and it helps them express what they're trying to say. This is the Spirit of God, when he was helping people, influencing people to write biblical books. The first thing he does isn't to empty their heads. Okay, he's going to use what's in their heads. That's stuff he can draw on. And I think in God's providence, God prepares writers for the moment when they're going to produce something. For posterity.
I think that's
it's the most normal thing in the world.
Yeah.
But it somehow escapes us that every word of the Bible has to be unique. It has to drop from heaven. It can't appear in any other book. And if it does, I have to junk inspiration. I'm going to give up the thing. I mean, I actually have emails like this. I got an email one time from somebody that said, "I saw on the History Channel that the Babylonians had a law about the Sabbath day, like every 7 days or something, and this is just destroying my faith, and I don't want to have anything to do with the Bible anymore." And I'm thinking, like, I'm just going to put this in the bucket of dumb reasons people have left.
Well, yeah, and I would say, this would be a reason to maybe read some of the patristic literature, because Clement said gold in the pocket of the thief is still gold.
Yeah, it's the most normal thing in the world. The biblical writers were humans. The Bible is not a channeled book. That's for UFO cults.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
The Bible is not a channeled book. It's a book produced by people that God providentially prepared through the whole course of their lives, preparing them for the moment when he would make the circumstances what they were, to put them in the position where I need you to write this down.
Mm-hmm.
I need you to produce this letter. I need you to record that chronicle. Do the job. I mean, you can do it. I have prepared you. You are fully capable of doing a job.
Mm-hmm.
And their education is part of that. So they're not just a bunch of, empty-headed, flesh bots or something that, automatic writing and channeled books. But this is the way we're taught to think about Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
And for someone to get their faith destroyed by the fact that another culture has a similar law, well, again, pro tip, newsflash, it's the Middle East.
Sure.
Okay, that of course they have similar laws because they live in the same region and people do the same behaviors, good and bad. They have the same life situations. Again, it's the most normal thing